Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to start building this Mini CAD application. As you can see, we can create different shapes, select them, move them around, resize them and interact with the drawing area like a simple CAD program. We're going to build the project step by step, and in this part we're going to focus only on the front end. So we'll create the complete interface and get everything ready before we start adding the actual functionality. Alright, let's get started. So I'm starting here with an empty project, and the first thing we're going to do is create two files, an index HTML file for our structure and a style CSS for styling. Inside the index HTML file, I'm going to type an exclamation mark and press Tab, which gives us a basic HTML structure automatically. So inside the head tag, I will add a link to style.css. Now let's start creating the main structure of our application. First, I'll create a div with a class of app. This is going to be the main container that holds everything inside our app. Then inside of that, I will add a header tag with the class of app header. And for now, the only thing we need inside the header is an h1 tag with the title of Mini CAD. Next, I'm going to create the toolbar using a nav element with a class of toolbar. Inside that, I will add our first button, which will be the select tool. I'll give it the classes tool and active, since this will be the default selected tool. Then I'll add a data tool attribute with the value select. We'll use this later in JavaScript to identify which tool the button represents. I'm also setting the type to button so it behaves like a normal button and doesn't try to submit anything. And inside the button, I will add one span for the icon and another for the text. Now that we have our first tool button, I'm going to create the rest of the buttons in the same way. Each one will use the same tool class, but we will change the data tool, the icon, and the text depending on what the tool does. So we will add the rest of the drawing tools and complete our toolbar. Next, we're going to create the main workspace. For that, I'll add a main element with a class of workspace. And inside it, I'll create an SVG with an ID of canvas. This SVG is going to be our actual drawing area, where all of the shapes will be created and displayed later on. Inside the SVG, I'm going to add a devs element. This is where we can define reusable SVG elements that we don't want to display directly. In our case, we're going to use it to define the grid pattern for the drawing area. The pattern is going to have an ID of grid, and it's going to have a width and a height of 25 units. Then I'll set pattern units to user space on use. This means that the pattern's width and height use the same coordinate system as the SVG itself. So each grid cell will be 25 by 25 SVG units. Inside the pattern, I'll add a small circle which will represent one dot of our grid. I'll set the circle X and circle Y to 2, the radius to 1.5, and finally I'll give it a class of grid dot. Now I will add a rectangle that has a class of grid background that covers the entire SVG by setting its width and height to 100%. For the fill, we'll use a URL that references the pattern with the ID of grid that we created earlier and uses that pattern to fill the entire rectangle. And finally, at the bottom of the application, I'll add a footer with a class of status bar. Inside will display the word selected, followed by a strong element that currently says none. I'll also give it an ID of selected status, because later we'll use JavaScript to update this text depending on which shape is selected. Now that we have the basic HTML structure finished, I'll open the project using Live Server so we can see what we have so far. And as you can see, everything is here. We have our title, the toolbar buttons, the SVG drawing area with the grid, and the status bar at the bottom. Okay, now that our HTML structure is done, it is time to move on to the CSS. We're going to use a mobile-first approach, so we will start by styling everything for smaller screens first, and then we'll use media queries to adjust the layout as the screen gets larger. First, I'm going to do a little bit of basic setup. I'll use the universal selector to set box sizing to border box, and I will also remove the default margin and padding from all elements. Then I'll set both the HTML and body to take up the full width and height of the screen. And for the body, I'll set a simple font stack, our main text color, a white background, and finally overflow hidden so the page itself doesn't scroll while we're working inside the app. For the main app container, I'll use display grid because our layout is split into few clear sections. Then I'll define 4 rows, one for the header, one for the toolbar, one flexible row for the workspace, and one for the status bar. The workspace will use min-max of 0 and 1 FR, so it can take up all of the remaining space without causing overflow. After that, I'll style the header with a dark background and some padding, and then set the title to white, 24 pixels and bold. For the toolbar, I'm also using display grid. Then I'll create 3 equal columns using repeat of 3 and 1 FR, so the buttons are evenly distributed across the toolbar. I'll add a small gap between them, some padding around the toolbar, a white background, and a light border at the bottom to separate it from the workspace. For each tool button, I'll set the height to 44 pixels. Then I'll use display flex so we can easily center the icon and the text both vertically and horizontally. I'll add some small gap between them, some horizontal padding, a light border, and rounded corners. For the styling, I'll keep the background white, use our dark text color, and set the font size to 12 pixels. I also change the cursor to a pointer so it feels clickable. For the workspace, I'll make it take up the full available width and I'll set the minimum height to 0 so it can shrink properly inside our grid layout. Then for the SVG canvas, I'll set it to display block and make it fill the entire workspace with width and height set to 100%. And finally, I'll set touch action to none. This just gives us full control over what happens when we interact with the canvas, especially later when we add dragging and resizing. And finally, I'll style the status bar. I'll use Flexbox to align everything in the center, add some spacing and padding, and a light border at the top. Then I'll set the font size to 14 pixels and make the selected status slightly bolder. Alright, and that's our mobile styling done. Next, I'm going to add the tablet and desktop styles using media queries. Most of this is pretty straightforward, so I won't talk through every single property. I'll just let you follow along as I adjust the layout for the larger screens. And with that, we are done with the styling. Our Mini CAD interface is now fully responsive and works across mobile, tablet, and desktop screen sizes. In the next part, we'll start adding the actual functionality and bring the application to life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.